It started with one sentence on a live stream, dropped without warning, like a lit match in dry grass. Funky Dineva leaned closer to the camera, eyes sharp, voice steady, and said, "Since everybody wants the truth, I guess tonight is the night." Within minutes, fans were flooding comment sections, group chats were exploding, and one name after another began to trend. Together in a way no one expected, Tamar Mendeecees and the word no one saw coming. Affair. By the time the live ended, the internet was already on fire. Screenshots flew across social media. Old clips were dug up and replayed in slow motion. Every smile, every sideways glance, every shared event between Tamar and Mendeecees was suddenly under a microscope. Fans were shocked, and some refused to believe it. Others said the signs had been there all along. Emotions ran high before either Tamar or Mendeecees had said a single word. What made it worse was the timing. Tamar had just started to regain public goodwill after months of quiet rebuilding. Mendeecees was trying to keep his family image steady under constant pressure. And now, Funky Dineva had thrown a match into both their worlds at once. According to him, this was not a rumor pulled from thin air. He hinted at private messages, secret meetings, and a betrayal so personal it would leave more than one family divided. Within hours, fans began choosing sides. Some accused Funky of stirring chaos for views. Others insisted he would never risk his credibility unless he had proof. Blogs ran with half-formed headlines. Tamar caught. Mendeecees unfaithful again. Industry secret finally exposed. Each headline added fuel to a fire that was already out of control. Behind the scenes, panic set in. Tamar's inner circle scrambled to contain the damage. Mendeecees' camp went silent, which only made the accusations feel louder. Phones rang without answers. Publicists drafted statements they were not yet ready to release. Friends who had once been friendly with both sides suddenly felt forced to choose loyalty or distance. Then came the second wave. Funky returned online and doubled down. This time, his tone was colder, more precise. He claimed this had been hidden in plain sight. He said betrayal does not always scream. Sometimes it whispers through late-night calls, locked doors, and favors that never make sense until it is too late. Fans listened in stunned silence as he hinted that someone very close to both Tamar and Mendeecees had finally broken and talked. Now the question was no longer whether something happened. The question was how deep it went. Was this a brief emotional lapse or a long-running secret? Who knew and stayed quiet? Who helped cover it up? And who stood to lose everything once the full story came out? By the end of that night, one thing was clear. Whatever truth lay hidden between Tamar and Mendeecees was no longer private. The spotlight was on. The internet was watching. And the next move by any one of them could either end the storm or turn it into something far more destructive. The morning after the live stream felt heavier than anyone expected, as if the city itself had woken up holding its breath. And inside separate homes across Atlanta and New York, phones would not stop vibrating with missed calls, alerts, and messages that carried the same three names over and over again: Funky Dineva, Tamar, and Mendeecees, all stitched together by one word that refused to disappear: affair. And while the public tore the rumor apart in real time, the private fallout began quietly. In kitchens, bedrooms, and parked cars where voices were kept low but emotions ran high. Because rumors may live in public, but consequences always begin in private. And for Tamar, the first call came from someone she trusted more than most. A voice tight with worry, asking what in the world was happening, and whether any of it was true. And Tamar, still groggy from sleep and shock, could only sit at the edge of her bed, staring at the wall as the weight of the night before rushed back into her chest again. She denied it at first, quickly, almost reflexively, insisting that Funky had taken things too far this time, that nothing like that had ever happened. But even as she spoke the words, she could feel how thin they sounded in the air. Because the internet had already chosen its own version of the story, and it was moving faster than her denials ever could. While across town, Mendeecees was having a very different morning, one filled with anger instead of panic. He replayed the clip again and again, listening to Funky's steady voice, watching the comments roll by in a blur of accusations and sarcasm. And each time the clip ended, his jaw tightened a little more, because no matter how many times he told himself it was all lies, the damage was already done. His name was tied to Tamar's in a way that felt impossible to clean, and the silence from his own home hurt more than the noise online. The unanswered texts, the door that stayed closed longer than usual, the feeling that trust was starting to shift beneath his feet without him even touching it. And by mid-morning, the blogs had picked up the story in full, adding their own layers of speculation, claiming there were screenshots, unnamed sources, and whispers from insiders who had seen more than they were willing to say on record. Fans were shocked, emotions ran high, and every new post sharpened the divide between those who believed Funky outright and those who swore this was nothing but another internet setup. Yet what neither side could see was how fast the people closest to the center of the storm were unraveling. Because Tamar's circle quickly filled with urgent conversations, some friends urged her to go live immediately and shut the rumor down, while others warned that any response would only feed the fire. And in the middle of it all, Tamar felt trapped between two instincts: the urge to defend herself and the fear that even the smallest statement might be twisted into proof of guilt. And as this debate played out behind closed doors, Mendeecees was dealing with pressure of his own. Men he trusted called him with blunt questions. Women he thought were friends grew distant overnight, and the look in the eyes of those around him began to change from confidence to doubt. Even in rooms where his closest allies stood, the mood was no longer steady, it was brittle, as if one badly chosen word could shatter whatever was left of calm. And just when both sides thought the noise could not climb any louder, Funky Dineva returned with another stream, his tone no longer explosive but deliberate, measured, as if he fully understood the weight of what he was continuing to place into motion. He claimed that this was not about gossip, that this was about accountability, and that what he had shared was only the beginning of what he knew. And in that moment, the mood online shifted from chaos to anticipation, because fans could sense that the story was no longer driven by rumor alone, it was being shaped by a promise of more. And with every cryptic line Funky dropped, imaginations went wild. People pulled up old interviews between Tamar and Mendeecees, comparing body language, reading into laughs that once seemed harmless. Late-night appearances that once felt ordinary now took on hidden meanings, and the family was left divided not only because of the rumor itself, but because of the way it forced everyone to look backward and question their own memories. While all of this unfolded publicly, a far quieter confrontation was beginning to take shape in private, because Mendeecees could no longer ignore the tension in his own home. And that night, when the world outside was still buzzing with the story, he finally faced the person whose silence had begun to feel louder than any headline. His voice was controlled at first, almost to calm, as he demanded to know whether there was anything he needed to be told, whether there was a truth that had not yet reached him. And the response he received was not a clear denial, nor a full confession, but something in between. A pause that stretched too long, an answer that circled the question instead of meeting it, and in that spaced doubt planted itself firmly in his chest for the first time. Because lies do not always need words to be spoken. Sometimes they arrive in hesitation. And on the other side of the city, Tamar was facing a reckoning of her own, not with Mendeecees directly but with someone from her past, who had suddenly resurfaced with questions and thinly veiled accusations. Someone who hinted that secrets rarely stay buried forever, that timing is never random, and that when the truth wants air, it always finds a crack to rise through. And as Tamar listened to this voice from her past, her earlier confidence began to fade into something shaky, because this was no longer just about public image. It was about choices that had been made in moments she had long tried to forget. Choices she once believed were safely sealed away in another chapter of her life, now resurfacing in a way she could not control. And by the end of the first day since Funky's claim went viral, both Tamar and Mendeecees were surrounded by people, yet felt completely alone, each locked in separate rooms of suspicion and memory, with the same question echoing through their minds in different tones. What exactly had Funky meant when he said the truth had been hidden in plain sight? Because somewhere between the denials, the pauses, the old messages pulled from digital shadows, and the faces that no longer looked the same, a deeper story was beginning to take shape. One that promised not just scandal but fallout that would reach far beyond the three names, now dominating every screen. And even as night finally settled in, bringing with it a brief quiet to the timelines and comments sections, the emotional storm continued to build behind closed doors, waiting for the next spark that would push it fully into the open. Be the time the second night fell, the quiet no longer felt like relief. It felt like the calm before impact. Because even though the comment sections slowed and the trends shifted for a few hours, the pressure inside both camps only intensified. And within Mendeecees' home, the air had thickened with questions that were no longer being avoided. His earlier calm had worn thin, replaced by a restless edge that followed him from room to room. And when he finally sat down across from the person who shared his life, his voice no longer carried restraint, it carried hurt. He asked again, more directly this time, whether there had ever been any private contact with Tamar that went beyond public spaces and industry events. And the silence that followed was heavier than before, not because words were not spoken but because the words that came felt incomplete. technical, carefully trimmed to fit only the narrowest version of truth. And in that moment, Mendeecees felt something settle in his chest that he had hoped never to feel again. The sense that betrayal does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it arrives disguised as half-answers and guarded eyes. And while this private storm was unfolding at home, outside the walls, allies were beginning to fracture. Some close friends distanced themselves quietly, avoiding calls and unanswered texts as if proximity itself had become dangerous. Others took sides openly, defending Mendeecees with absolute confidence and painting Tamar as a calculated distraction, while a separate circle defended Tamar just as fiercely, insisting she was being targeted because of fame, gender, and the ease with which public opinion loves to burn women at the stake. And fans were shocked not only by the allegation but by how fast loyalties were shifting in its wake. And in the middle of this widening divide, Funky Dineva remained silent for just long enough to let the audience grow desperate for answers, then returned with what he framed as context, not proof, but a trail. He spoke about private encounters at industry gatherings, about unusual timing, about mutual friends who felt caught between warning and exposure, and every new sentence felt like a door being pushed further open. Even without names being fully stated, the implications grew heavier with each breath he took. And somewhere in that web of implication, a single moment from the past rose to the surface with new weight. A charity event months earlier where Tamar and Mendeecees had both been present, captured in candid footage that once passed without consequence, now slowed down and played on loop across social media. Their proximity suddenly framed as suspicious, their laughter recast as evidence, their brief exchange now treated as the spark from which everything burned. And as this clip spread, Tamar watched it alone on her phone, late into the night, the volume turned low. Her reflection, faint in the dark screen as she replayed a version of herself she barely recognized anymore. She whispered to herself that it meant nothing, that it had meant nothing at the time, yet her chest tightened because the past does not change simply because the present grows loud. And in another room, across another city, Mendeecees watched the same clip with very different eyes, noticing details he had once overlooked. The slight hesitation before she walked away, the expression he could not now fully read, and for the first time he wondered, not just what had happened, but what might have almost happened. And that question proved just as destructive as any confirmed truth, because suspicion thrives in uncertainty, and uncertainty had now wrapped itself tightly around both of their lives. And as dawn approached again, the outside world began to stir with new energy around the story. A so-called insider stepped forward through one of the blogs, offering a vague account of late-night phone calls and secret meetups that could neither be fully verified nor fully dismissed. The blog presented it as close to proof as the public was likely to get, and suddenly fans who had hesitated were choosing sides with sharper certainty, some claiming this anonymous voice validated Funky's claims, others saying it was nothing more than fabricated noise designed to keep the story alive for profit. But inside Mendeecees' home, the damage did not wait for verification. Another argument erupted, this one louder than the last. Voices finally rising after days of restraint, accusations pushed openly into the room, and when the past was pulled into the present with such force, every old wound found new reasons to bleed. Mendeecees demanded honesty not just about Tamar, but about every moment that now felt recontextualized by doubt. And what followed was not a confession but an emotional collapse. Tears that fell without clear explanation, apologies that did not specify what they were meant to cover. And in that emotional fog, Mendeecees felt the ground beneath his certainty give way entirely, because clarity had become impossible, and the absence of clear truth became its own form of cruelty. Meanwhile, Tamar's own world was cracking under a different kind of pressure. Her management team urged silence while her personal friends urged defiance. But the people whose opinions cut deepest were not on payroll nor in public view. They were the ones who carried shared memories, who knew the private version of her life that cameras never touched. And one of those people finally confronted her directly, not through a call but face to face. The conversation unfolded without shouting, without accusations, but with something far colder, disappointment layered beneath controlled words. And when that person asked whether any line had ever truly been crossed, Tamar felt the room tilt slightly, because this was not the internet demanding a performance. This was someone she had once trusted with the truth, and her answer came slowly, carefully shaped. Admitting closeness without naming consequence, admitting tension without naming action. and the look she received in return told her there were truths she was trying too hard to keep unnamed. And somewhere beyond these private confrontations, Funky Dineva's influence continued to expand even in silence. Reaction videos multiplied, commentators dissected body language, and long-forgotten industry gossip resurfaced as if summoned from hiding, every piece stitched together into narratives that no longer needed confirmation to feel real to the audience. And as speculation thickened, so did the emotional distance between the people actually living inside the story. Mendeecees grew quieter in public and harsher in private, while Tamar retreated into controlled appearances that felt increasingly strained. And with each performance of normalcy, the strain became more visible to those watching closely. Because eyes carry truths, the mouth refuses to speak, and fans who once looked for entertainment now searched for cracks. And just when both sides believed the situation could not grow more volatile, a development surfaced that shifted the ground beneath them. Once again, a leaked message, blurred just enough to claim privacy but clear enough to ignite assumption, circulated through the same corners of the internet that had amplified everything else. The message did not explicitly name an affair, but the tone suggested intimacy, familiarity that did not sit comfortably within innocence, and the timestamps aligned too closely with the period Funky had implied. And within hours, the leak became the new center of gravity in the story. Fans were no longer debating whether something might have happened, they were debating how far it went. And inside Mendeecees' home, that leak landed like a physical blow, because it matched details he remembered questioning before but had once chosen to dismiss. And now, dismissal felt like self-deception. While across town, Tamar stared at the same pixels in disbelief, recognizing phrasing that could not be easily explained away, knowing that even if context existed, the public would never allow it room to breathe. And in that shared realization, both felt the same impending truth rise at the edge of their separate minds, that the story was no longer controlled by intention or denial. It had become a living thing shaped by shadows, reaction, and the hunger of an audience that did not know them personally but felt entitled to every detail of their collapse. And as the second day bled into its end, the weight of that realization pressed down on both of them, leaving Mendeecees angrier than he had ever been, and Tamar more afraid than she had ever allowed herself to be, because the storm was no longer forming. It had formed, and it was only beginning to show what it was capable of. Destroying. The third day arrived with a sense of inevitability, as if the universe itself had aligned to amplify every whisper, every suspicion, and every glance between Tamar and Mendeecees. And by the time the sun hit the internet was a frenzy once more. Reaction videos multiplying, threads stretching across platforms as fans dissected every moment of footage, every prior interview, every interaction that might hint at the truth. And even those who had previously resisted taking a side found themselves drawn in, compelled to analyze, speculate, and comment. Because the story had grown beyond rumor, it had become a narrative of tension, secrecy, and potential betrayal, and in homes across the country. The actual people at the center of it all could feel the pressure in ways no public commentary could capture. Mendeecees woke to find messages stacked high in his inbox, some demanding statements, some threatening, some sympathetic but tinged with judgment, and he scrolled through each one with increasing fatigue, the tightness in his chest growing as the implications of Funky Dineva's claims lingered like smoke in every corner of his life. Meanwhile, Tamar faced a mirrored storm, old friends calling to check, fans flooding her social media with pleas, accusations, and support, and the duality of silence and scrutiny pressed on her, leaving her teetering between self-defense and the instinct to retreat. And yet, despite the chaos, the two worlds collided in unexpected ways. Private conversations that had begun in hushed tones escalated into open confrontations. Words chosen for clarity now felt insufficient, and the emotional toll of answering questions while protecting reputations began to manifest visibly in posture, expressions, and small gestures that spoke louder than any carefully crafted statement ever could. Somewhere in between the public and private spheres, Funky Dineva remained a constant gravitational pull, issuing subtle updates, hints, and provocations, never outright confirming more than what he had initially claimed. Yet his presence alone ensured that the narrative would not settle, that doubt and curiosity would continue to fester, and within that growing pressure, cracks began to appear in the alliances surrounding both Tamar and Mendeecees. People once thought reliable now revealed discomfort, boundaries shifted, loyalties were tested, and the emotional landscape around the two central figures became a minefield. One misstep could set off another wave of conflict, and as the day unfolded, these small fractures began to align, creating moments of tension that no one outside the inner circle could fully appreciate. Mendeecees confronted a longtime confidant, demanding clarity on whether anyone knew more than they were letting on. The exchange was tense, voices low but sharp, the conversation threaded with frustration, anger, and a desperate search for control in a situation rapidly spiraling beyond it. Simultaneously, Tamar met with a close associate, someone who had stood by her in countless public crises. And yet, even this relationship now bore the strain of doubt. Questions were asked in careful phrasing, answers measured. Yet each pause felt pregnant with suspicion, and the balance of trust shifted imperceptibly with every passing minute. The same digital world that amplified Funky's voice now served as a second, invisible battleground. Fans speculated over coffee, shared screenshots, dissected tone, timing, and word choice, each new analysis fueling the fire. And even the people closest to Tamar and Mendeecees began to adjust their behavior accordingly. Defensive postures, subtle distancing, guarded conversations, all creating an environment where emotional stakes were higher than ever. And as afternoon approached, a third element entered the scene, an anonymous tip sent directly to a major blog, hinting at past meetings that had never been public, interactions that were fleeting but significant in context. The post contained vague dates, ambiguous references, and unnamed intermediaries, yet it was enough to drive speculation into overdrive. Fans now debated not only the likelihood of an affair but the possibility of a sustained secret, the implications of which threatened not just reputations but the perceived integrity of personal and professional lives intertwined. The day's tension culminated in a confrontation between Mendeecees and another member of his circle, an argument that was not loud in volume but deafening in impact. Accusations mingled with defensive reasoning, every word scrutinized, every gesture interpreted as proof or pretense. And in that private room the emotional toll reached its peak, because once trust fractures, the smallest misstep can feel catastrophic. At the same time, Tamar's circle held a late-night meeting, voices low but tense, strategies debated, options weighed, the goal always to contain the fallout while protecting her. And yet, even within these calculated discussions, unease lingered, because no plan can fully anticipate the unpredictability of human behavior, public perception, or the next revelation. Late that night, a new clip surfaced, footage from an old behind-the-scenes event. Moments that had previously been innocuous now took on new connotations. The way Tamar looked at Mendeecees, a touch on the arm, laughter that lingered just a moment too long, all became evidence in the court of public opinion. And as fans dissected it with relentless intensity, both central figures could feel the weight of scrutiny pressing in, each movement, each expression, each hesitation magnified 100-fold. And in the quiet spaces, away from screens, personal relationships strained to breaking, friends questioned loyalties, family members weighed caution against confrontation, and the emotional climate thickened, anxiety bleeding into every interaction. By the early hours of the fourth day, the narrative had grown beyond the original claims. The story was no longer just about an alleged affair but about trust, betrayal, perception, and control. The lives of Tamar and Mendeecees entwined in ways that made every decision consequential. And as dawn crept over the horizon once more, both sat awake in separate rooms, the weight of the past and the storm of the present converging, realizing that the path forward was uncertain, every choice potentially explosive, and every silence interpreted, because in this world of exposure and speculation, even absence could speak volumes. And the third day ended not with resolution but with the quiet, terrifying awareness that the story had taken on a life of its own, one that would continue to shape, challenge, and possibly destroy everything they thought untouchable. The fourth day opened with a tension that felt almost tangible, as if the air itself had grown heavier, carrying the weight of speculation, accusation, and anticipation. And once again, social media erupted before either Tamar or Mendeecees could even step outside their homes. Funky Dineva had teased a new detail the night before, hinting at private exchanges and emotional closeness that had been obscured by public appearances. And even without specifics, fans rushed to fill the gaps, dissecting old interviews, scrutinizing past photos, and replaying moments that now seemed loaded with hidden meaning. And within the homes of Tamar and Mendeecees, the fallout from these digital storms translated into urgent, quiet meetings, the kind where words were measured but the tension could be cut with a knife. Mendeecees spent hours replaying conversations from the past, noting moments that previously seemed harmless, now suspect, each pause, each sidelong glance, each unspoken sentence magnified, creating a psychological weight that pressed on him relentlessly. Simultaneously, Tamar faced her own cascade of pressures. Old friends and allies reached out with cryptic messages, some attempting reassurance, others probing carefully for acknowledgement of what had happened, and the uncertainty left her feeling exposed, as though every interaction could shift from support to accusation in an instant. The emotional strain for both was compounded by the realization that public perception had now taken on a life of its own. Threads spun in online forums, clips and screenshots circulated endlessly, and the narrative had become something no single clarification could contain. With each passing hour, fans, commentators, and casual observers alike became part of a pressure cooker, their speculation acting like a magnifying lens, amplifying every movement and word from both Tamar and Mendeecees. While in private, cracks began to form in their inner circles. Allies who had once provided steady reassurance now wavered, unsure whether to trust statements, instincts, or public opinion, and even minor disagreements about strategy and messaging were now charged with emotional weight. Mendeecees confronted yet another member of his confidants, seeking clarity, demanding honesty, each exchange leaving him simultaneously frustrated and unsettled, while Tamar navigated the same emotional terrain from a different angle, carefully balancing truth, image, and loyalty, every decision layered with consequences that could ripple beyond immediate circles. As the day progressed, a new leak surfaced. A series of messages purportedly between Tamar and a mutual acquaintance surfaced online, ambiguous yet suggestive enough to reignite debates. These messages, stripped of context and released without consent, sent fans into renewed frenzy, hashtags and speculation trending within minutes, the subtle implications more damaging than outright statements. And in response, both Tamar and Mendeecees felt the tightening grip of the storm around them, the walls of their private worlds feeling increasingly porous, invaded not by strangers but by those who claimed to care, whose curiosity and judgment alike were relentless. Late in the afternoon, another confrontation erupted in Mendeecees' space, quieter than previous arguments but charged with tension. Voices low but cutting, questions repeated, clarifications demanded, frustration mounting, and even apologies carried a weight, none of them fully alleviating the suspicion that had rooted itself deeply. Simultaneously, Tamar faced her own confrontation. A close friend who had been silent until now finally spoke, not accusatory, but cautious, their words implying knowledge of moments she had tried to keep private, forcing Tamar into a delicate balance between defense and disclosure, between silence and revelation, and the duel, compounded by the pressure of anticipating the next revelation, the feeling that every phone buzz, every new notification might carry a new blow, while conversations with his closest allies had shifted from reassurance to guarded analysis, strategic silence, and the careful parsing of every word and expression. At the same time, Tamar found herself walking a tightrope, balancing her public appearances with the unrelenting curiosity of fans and friends alike, the constant need to manage perception while protecting personal boundaries. Every interaction charged with significance, every pause interpreted, every glance dissected, and the emotional strain grew heavier with each passing hour. A leaked audio snippet emerged midday, barely 30 seconds long, the content ambiguous but suggestive, fans immediately amplifying it across every platform, debates escalating, evidence assumed where none could be fully confirmed, and the implication was enough to drive new waves of judgment, accusation, and speculation. Inside Mendeecees' home, the snippet arrived like a shockwave. He replayed it repeatedly, searching for context, clarity, anything to settle the tightening knot in his chest. But the lack of certainty only fueled frustration, while Tamar simultaneously absorbed the same clip, her heart racing, the fear of being misinterpreted or wrongly judged pressing down, and both felt the relentless scrutiny closing in from all sides. By late afternoon, the emotional temperature in both homes had reached a breaking point. Arguments with close allies became unavoidable. Words chosen for subtlety exploded into confrontations. Frustrations poured out, accusations mixed with defensive reasoning, and every interaction carried the potential to reshape perception. And yet, even in the midst of personal storms, funky Dineva's influence persisted. Subtle social media drops, cryptic tweets, and selective commentary keeping the audience engaged, hungry, and judgmental. And fans were no longer merely spectators. They were participants, drawing conclusions, debating motives, and projecting their interpretations, while Mendeecees struggled with internal conflict, balancing the need to defend himself with the fear of saying too much, every pause scrutinized, every gesture magnified, and even casual interactions became tests of trust. Simultaneously, Tamar faced similar internal turbulence. Every phone call, every meeting, every public engagement, a negotiation between transparency and self-preservation. Private conversations that had once been simple were now laden with suspicion, analysis, and potential consequence. And, as the evening set in, a series of private messages leaked, alleged exchanges between Tamar and an intermediary, ambiguous, suggesting familiarity and emotional connection, but leaving context and intent open to interpretation. Fans dissected every word, analyzing tone, timing, and implication, and suddenly, the conversation online was no longer only about rumor. It became about possible betrayal, emotional stakes, and the reliability of memory. Inside Mendeecees' space, the leak landed like a blow. Conversations with confidants became tense, defensive, charged with frustration and uncertainty, while Tamar, seeing the same content, felt her world tilt. The line between private and public collapsing, trust becoming slippery, and every ally, every friend, every relationship faced the pressure of scrutiny. Decisions had to be made about what to reveal, what to conceal, and how to navigate the relentless gaze of an audience that had become both jury and witness. And as night deepened, a confrontation arose between Mendeecees and a trusted friend. Voices low but heavy with emotion, demands for honesty mixing with careful phrasing, frustration erupting into subtle accusation, and apologies, when given, carrying weight without resolving the tension. Tamar, meanwhile, faced a quiet but no less intense confrontation. A friend whose loyalty was unquestioned suddenly asked probing questions, leaving Tamar in a position where half-truths and omissions risked exposure, and both central figures understood that every movement, word, and silence could be interpreted as confirmation or denial, misstep or defense. While outside, the world continued to spin the story with its own momentum, fans, bloggers, and commentators crafting narratives independent of fact, amplifying insinuations, and ensuring that the speculation would not die down. And as the fifth day came to a close, the weight of public scrutiny, private confrontation, and emotional strain pressed down more heavily than ever. Mendeecees and Tamar were not merely participants in a story, they were living inside a narrative that had outgrown their control, where perception shaped reality, where rumor had the power to redefine history, and where the next move by either could escalate or diffuse a storm that had already grown relentless. The fifth night ended not with answers, but with the quiet, suffocating awareness that the story had become unstoppable, its momentum carried forward by curiosity, judgment, and the unrelenting pressure of living under the gaze of an audience that would not forget. The sixth day began under a heavy, oppressive tension, as if the weight of the previous 5 days had crystallized into something impossible to ignore. And even before either Tamar or Mendeecees fully rose from bed, their phones were alive with notifications, mentions, tags, and messages, every ping a potential spark, every alert a reminder that the world outside had taken possession of their private lives. Funky Dineva, once again, had returned to social media, this time with a cryptic post that hinted at further revelations, moments of closeness, secret exchanges, and emotional entanglements. The public responded immediately, dissecting every word, tone, and implication, and in homes across cities, fans speculated, friends debated, and the story continued to take on a life independent of fact. Inside Mendeecees' world, the stress manifested in restless pacing, a constant checking of phones, and repeated conversations with confidants who were themselves unsure of what to say or do. The emotional landscape was volatile, every interaction laced with tension, and the stakes had become more than reputational, they were deeply personal, each whisper of doubt or suspicion cutting into the fragile trust he once held. Simultaneously, Tamar navigated a parallel storm, balancing the need to appear composed with the gnawing anxiety that each moment in public could be misinterpreted, that every smile, pause, or gesture would be scrutinized, while private conversations offered no real respite, as friends and allies probed delicately, worried that silence could be interpreted as admission, and that any disclosure could become tomorrow's headline. As the day unfolded, a new leak emerged. A photo from months prior showing Tamar and Mendeecees in close proximity at a private event. The image grainy but suggestive, and the internet erupted instantly, each comment thread dissecting body language, positioning, and expression, the narrative now expanding beyond allegations into interpretation. And inside Mendeecees' home, the photograph became the centerpiece of a tense discussion, questions about intent, context, and memory intertwining with anger, frustration, and helplessness. At the same time, Tamar received inquiries from her management and close friends, the pressure mounting to clarify, deny, or comment. Yet each option carried risk of escalation, misrepresentation, and loss of control. As the afternoon turned into evening, another confrontation unfolded, this one between Mendeecees and a longtime confidant. Voices low but sharp, words carefully chosen yet heavy with accusation, defensiveness, and suspicion. The conversation ending without resolution but leaving a residue of tension that would persist into the night. Tamar, meanwhile, faced a parallel reckoning, an ally asking pointed questions, pressing for acknowledgement, leaving her balancing between protective silence and the need to assert control over her narrative. And while these private storms raged, the public continued to consume, speculate, and judge, each comment, post, and share adding layers of complexity. The story growing larger than the individuals it centered on, becoming a force that demanded attention, analysis, and emotional engagement from everyone it touched. Late into the night, messages were leaked suggesting private meetings and emotional exchanges, ambiguous but enough to fuel fresh debate. Fans divided, loyalties questioned, and the speculation reached a fever pitch. And within both households, Mendeecees and Tamar were left confronting a single truth, that every move, every word, and even silence could be interpreted, misinterpreted, weaponized, and amplified. That control over the narrative had shifted irreversibly, and that the story now existed in a space where reality and perception were inseparable. As midnight approached, a final confrontation of the day took place. Mendeecees facing one of his closest friends, a dialogue tense, emotionally charged, the air thick with accusation, defensiveness, and unresolved questions. Apologies offered but insufficient, emotions raw and exposed, while Tamar navigated her own private reckoning, careful not to tip the balance, mindful that every interaction carried consequence. And by the end of the 6th day, the scope of the storm had become undeniable, public attention unrelenting, private relationships stretched to the breaking point, and both Tamar and Mendeecees realized that the story was no longer theirs to control. It had taken on a life of its own, driven by curiosity, rumor, and relentless scrutiny, a force unstoppable, uncontainable, and poised to continue shaping, pressuring, and challenging everyone caught within its orbit.